The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spent a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
We are the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute, HVERI for short. A lot of people know us from the 2018 eruption of Kilauea in the Lower East Rift Zone. Working under Hawaii Tracker on the Facebook group. Since then, we've been trying to carry on and take the lessons, the hard lessons that were learned during that eruption and try and prepare for the next major disaster that comes to our island.
Yeah, so we do that through two different programs. One is Volcano Education, and the other part is digital resilience, which we address through online groups on social media. So the way the two programs work together is that the social media networks end up being a distribution pathway for all the information. And having that network in place means we can provide more than just volcano education, but any other preparedness information as well.
What we were working for really came about in the Mauna Loa eruption in 2022. Within hours of that eruption starting, we had the mayor, Mitch Roth, we had USGS HVO Ken Hahn on the stream trying to help flush out a little bit of the ongoing because it's so new. It's completely different from our previous major eruption, which was 2018.
One of the things that Talmadge and I were talking about was how do we deal with social media? And it was something we needed to figure out and get right. Our job is to get information to the public and make sure that the public get it as well as possible and as correctly as possible. When Philip and Dane started coming to and live streaming the meetings, it was great because we were reaching more people than we normally would. So when the eruption actually happened, we had this relationship. The interviews we did during the eruption, the most fun ones were the ones with Philip and Dave because they were more relaxed and we knew we were getting to the local community and people were asking questions. So those were the best, I think. I just want to really give a shout out to those guys and how we worked as a team on this eruption. It really worked out well and we got to a lot of people we wouldn't have normally gotten.
Aloha everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont from the nonprofit HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. Today is Thursday, November 21st, 2024. Kilauea and Mauna Loa have both been quiet, but we'll bring you guys a special presentation on the upcoming anniversary of Mauna Loa today. So that's what we have on our agenda today. How are you doing today, Dane? How's your week been?
Oh, doing pretty good. All's quiet on the Western Front, and where it gives us time to do some other things and projects that we've been working on, more long-term goals. So appreciate the time to be able to work on some of our other programs.
Yeah, for sure. Always so much going on. We'll share some of that with you guys a little bit later there. So, yeah, maybe without further ado, we'll get into our program here today, starting with our summary. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, if anybody's got any questions, we'll be doing 2 parts today. The current conditions and anything that's happening now is going to be up on the front end, and we'll be diving into Mauna Loa on the back end. So just, if you got any current questions, now would be the time.
Yeah, thanks for leading that discussion, Dane. Collecting questions. And one more thing to mention, a little scheduling note. Next week, Thursday, will be Thanksgiving Day. And so we will be taking a week off next week. And unless something pulls us back sooner, we'll plan to come back to you guys in 2 weeks from today. So just keep that in mind as we do our summary and go through our program here today. All right, let's get our screen sorted here and get ready for our summary. Hello, everyone. This is our Hawaiian Volcano summary for November 21st, 2024. Kilauea is still quiet following the increased seismicity about a month ago, seen here on the left part of this graph. Earthquake rates have been fairly low, but the volcano has been filling somewhat quietly. If we look at the earthquake map, most of the seismicity is focused in this upper East Rift connector, where we know the magma pathway connects the summit to the Middle East Rift Zone, where we had our most recent eruption site near Nāpau crater. So these areas by Nāpau and in the Middle East Rift are still filling with magma, and we can see that through our tilt meters. First, we'll look at the summit stations at the Sand Hill tilt meter, and this is the last month. So as we've reviewed before, this blue line points more towards Hale and a green line towards the South Caldera. And within the last week, they've been moving together in sync. And what you see is that about a week ago, there was an increased pulse that came through on both components here that lasted a few days and then stabilized since. You can also see that perhaps in the last day or so, there may have been another beginnings of another pulse coming through the summit region. So note that. And note that this pulse comes through right around the 15th or 16th, right? If we move down to that upper East Rift connector, you'll see here that that component is also filling, maybe a little bit more slowly, but also peaking here a similar time around that 16th before becoming a little bit more flat as well. Continuing down a rift near Mokūʻaweoweo crater, this is now past eruption site. So the main component to the rift zone is showing deflation near Mokūʻaweoweo, but it looks to the west as well with this green component. And it also saw a slight pulse of filling within this last week here. That actually seems to lag a little bit, peaking perhaps on the 18th or so. And so maybe a little bit of delay from the pulse moving from the summit to the rift before starting over again. That seems to be what the sensors indicate right now. If we look at the GPS sensors from the UNR network, we see that at the sites closest to the Mokūʻaweoweo reservoir, this one down here is an up and down component, what we're most interested in. And we can see that there's been a steady continual rise of the ground in that area, which is really our indication that the area is still refilling. So that's the same story on Kilauea. And Mauna Loa is looking similar to before, with very few earthquakes at the summit. If we look at the rates over the past 5 years, you see they've really been quite low for the last year especially, even lower than the first year that followed the 2022 eruption, which is this cluster of high earthquake counts at the end of 2022. In our full update, we'll be covering the anniversary of this eruption, so look for that there if you're interested. Otherwise, we can say that Mauna Loa is still also continuing to rise in its upward component, as seen as a summit GPS station. And that's our Hawaiian Volcano summary for this week. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to our volcanic hazard summary. And that, as usual, is the gas right now. which we pull from the VOG Measurement and Prediction Project, VMAP, from the School of Ocean and Earth Science at the University of Hawaii Manoa. And that forecast at present looks like this. There's only 60 tons per day of SO2 coming out of the volcano, right around there, and it disperses with the current weather patterns. And it seems to pop up a few spots of yellow, maybe slightly increased VOG in the air, where I've just highlighted here. So in the nearer areas to the volcano, but reaching into the saddle and all the way to South Hawaii as well. So overall, fairly mild for the volcano, but it can be an issue if you are sensitive and have respiratory sensitivities. So that's our hazard summary, and not a whole lot of hazards, so we can move right along to our volcano watch this week. And we'll jump to volcano watch first, this early on, because today's topic is quantifying corrosion downwind of Kilauea. And so this is a project that was a joint effort by a group of scientists from New Zealand and from HVO. And essentially what they did was they brought these, what they're calling coupons, these little segments of different kinds of metal, and mounted them to an area, well, to several areas, both downwind and one area upwind of Kilauea summit. And they left them there for a year. Here's an image of where they put these on a station at the Desert Digital Seismic Station here. You can see that this roof that's on top of this enclosure is really corroded, right? So you can see like why they would select this as a candidate site. Put up all these coupons and left them for a year, then came back to see how they had been affected. And here's how they looked. I want to say 6 months in. Let me come down in here. 6 months in, you can see, and it's hard to tell exactly what's going on, but I believe this one on the left is copper on the left, mild steel in the center, and zinc on the right. So they're testing different kinds of metals for how they corrode. And what they're basically doing is after that full year, they're taking it and scraping off or dissolving all the stuff that corroded and seeing how much material is left so they can figure out the rate of corrosion on different materials in different areas. And one interesting thing that they found is that there was actually quite a high corrosion at the site that was closest to the summit, but upwind. And so they say that that might be a couple of things responsible for that. One might be the hydrogen sulfide, that really stinky rotten egg smell, H2S, that we talk about, combined with sulfur dioxide. The other thing might be just the higher amount of rainfall and moisture overall might be a factor as well. So things that we all know living here in Puna, but that the scientists from New Zealand are trying to quantify so that they can prepare for the effects of volcanic hazards in their own country, right? So that's the nice thing about collaboration. They can share that back and we can benefit here in Hawaii as well.
Yeah, I got a little bit on that. So flashing back to 2018, I'm going to just add something to the stage real quick. So just so you know, this was the scene of a gate that I was at my parents' house that was just off this driveway to the left. Now, this gate was galvanized steel, which is traditionally pretty good against rust out here. And this one was directly downwind of one of the major vents in the early part of the eruption. So what happened within 48 hours is that gate went from no rust to covered in rust. Wasn't rusted all the way through, but it was just amazing. Yeah, they're talking about the concentrations, and they did the study during a non-eruptive period. When it's erupting and it's directly next to the vent, those vents are sandblasters, but in the opposite direction, right? Instead of removing rust, they add rust really quickly.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. That was during a low sulfur period. They could have caught it a lot worse. And even with that background, looks like they're getting some effect there, right? So interesting to note there.
Yeah,
sure. All right, so let's move on to the earthquakes then. And our recent earthquakes look like this. This is the last 2 weeks colored by depth. So we see in the blues the deep Pahala earthquakes all through here. There's a couple of deeper ones under Kilauea as well. We see some shallow stuff around Mauna Loa. Mauna Loa seems to be settling, not at a very fast rate, but you see a couple of earthquakes on either flank here. Some settling events up north as well. We see the remains of the last 2 weeks over here at Kamaehua Kanaloa, formerly known as Loihi. And if we come in here closer to Kilauea, we can see a little bit better of the pattern. The deeper earthquakes underneath the summit or just south of the summit, and some offshore. Our cluster at the Upper East Rift Connector, and really not a whole lot. Some, but very low levels of earthquakes in the Middle East Rift, and more so on the south flank there. As you imagine, as magma is trying to reoccupy this area, it's pushing on the south flank once again, or changing the forces in that area. So those are our current earthquakes the last 2 weeks. If I pull up the last 2 days, most of that disappears. We even lose our Upper East Rift cluster, of which the largest event, I want to say, was a 3.1 1 week ago, less, perhaps a couple hours. So most of that has passed, and we're now in this quiet here. So that's the depth plot. Here is our plot where we can sort by our magnitudes. So there is our 3.1 that occurred just about a week ago, and the next one, the next largest is underneath the 2. So that was really the highlight there. And otherwise, we'll pull back to the last single day, and we can zoom out to the whole map and just see a lot of background seismicity across the island today, but nothing clustering in any particular area. So yeah, pretty ordinary with the earthquakes, we'll say. All right, so we'll move on to our monitoring on Kilauea next. And we are back to our weekly updates from the USGS now. So this week's update summarizes the lack of much happening. There's really not much to highlight in here. It's just much of the same language. I can scroll on the screen here. They still note that magma is still moving at a low rate from the summit to the Middle East Rift Zone. And of course, that will lead to something happening in the future. So that is really it for the volcano updates we've had this past week. There was an outage that occurred on Monday, which the USGS also issued a couple of information statements about. Our first one was earlier in the morning, noting that there was an outage occurring and there might be gaps in data online. And then the next report comes out about an hour and a half later, where they say they resolved the issue. However, because it was due to a power outage and things were coming back online, they had slow data coming in over that following day or so. So by now, everything is back on track. But if you were looking at the volcanic data earlier in a week, then you may have come across this. So pointed out here for those of you who were wondering what was going on with that. Moving on to our monitoring data itself, let's come to the top here. Top. So for the last week, we don't see a lot in that week plots for various reasons. Our Uikahuna tilt meter is not really giving us real data that we can tell here. So this is something we can scroll right by. Our earthquake counts for the last week are fairly even, so we're not learning much from that as well, apart from fairly consistent. And looking at depth versus time, we can see that the majority of those earthquakes were in fact at the tail end of last week. There's that 3.1 right there, and those earthquakes continued a little bit longer than that before we have a relatively quiet earthquake period with maybe a couple of flare-ups there and maybe one coming in here in the most recent hours. Pahala is trickling pretty slowly at the deeper zone here. So business as usual under Pahala and quiet at the surface. And a map we've looked at before, so keep going here and look at the 1 month time period. So we'll come past our malfunctioning tilt meter to the one that does work. We pointed this out before, that pulse that occurred a week ago and maybe a second one starting now with that delay time that propagates to the rift. So I'd be curious to see if we see that again. And otherwise, looking at depth versus time on a 1 month time scale, you can see how much greater the earthquake density is in this upper band here during that first week of this plot compared to anything since. And overall, really, this last week has been the quietest of all. So we'll wait to see what happens. If we didn't have these tilt signals, then we might think the volcano is really not doing much of anything, but it's just not quaking. It's filling, but it's not quaking a whole lot extra. Maybe a little bit extra right in here, right? But maybe a little bit extra right in here, but it's not really rising to these densities. So the earthquake counts reflect that. Here they are high in the early part of the month and low ever since. For the last year, looking at earthquakes per week now, we're coming up low still, as you can see here. And for the last 5 years, earthquakes per month, we're actually quite a bit lower. This may turn out to be our lowest month of the entire year, and perhaps of the last how long has it been since we've had earthquakes at this level, right? We have another week left in November. So potentially back to end of 2022 or even longer, back to 2020, depending on how quaky we get here in the next few days. Our GPS coming on the USGS website, unfortunately, is still showing us a lot of white space, blank. So for our GPS, we will have to once again turn to the Nevada Geodetic Laboratory GPS network map, which looks as this. And I will pull out a couple of the stations from there. But first, let me recall this older map. This is from a month ago now. The most recent INSAR image that the USGS released. This is satellite changes of the ground elevation. So this 1 month or this 2 week snapshot about a month ago was showing the area that was filling with uplift. This is the clearest image we have of where that reservoir is affecting the ground. And so there it is. You can see it's west of Pu'u'o. It's very near Nāpau, but it's centered by Mokūʻaweoweo, where our stations actually are, right? So I will show you guys a station at Puhimau up here near the bend, where we've seen the original dikes and intrusions occurring through here before it propagated around a corner. So we'll look at Puhimau. Then we'll look at area just near Mokūʻaweoweo right in here as well, by Nāpau, further over east of Pu'u'o. That's what we'll show you guys here coming up. So from starting at the upper end and working our way down at Puhimau, here is the GPS record for this station. And what I've done here is selected the stations that have very short installation times, have only come online fairly recently, because that allows these automatic plots to be more easily seen. You can see more detail in the plots here. So at Puhimau, these pink data are the ones that are the newest orbits that are still provisionally. They could change and have some error, but they give you the idea of what's going on, that it is rising, but it's rising at a fairly slow rate. And it's doing it at a comparable rate to what it was doing before, ever since the end of last year. Right? So Puhimau is still filling, but nothing crazy happening out there, nothing unusually fast. So moving over to near the eruption site, just west of it by Mokūʻaweoweo, the MMAU station we've looked at before. And as before, we'll keep focusing on an upward component. We know things are moving left and right, depending which way they're pushed in relation to the reservoir, but really I want to know, are they swelling or not, right? That's the most important thing here. So on this station, the MMAU station, you can see that the up signal is actually quite a bit up. Right? It looks like these are pretty tight data still, but they seem to be pretty steadily rising. Like it's not really stopping or slowing down at all. So this is likely the closest station to the center of filling right there. We go a little bit further east to the KERZ station. This is just west of Nāpau, just northwest of Nāpau. And it also is showing uplift, but you can see the uplift was faster earlier, and maybe now it has flattened out a little bit, with the caveat of it being this new data that can be corrected as well. But when we see it look so tight like this, that's pretty good indication that it's likely going to be good data. So it does look like it was rising faster and has slowed down a little bit near the eruption site. So some nuance in there. And we go further to the east of Pu'u'o crater, the upward signal. Here is a huge amount of scatter. And if you look at the scale is much smaller as well. So here, I don't really believe that this is too tight of data, and really the average is down here where the red line is. And so not a whole lot of effect, perhaps a little bit of rising happening east of Pu'o'o, but if so, it's being pushed from the west and it's not really being affected from very close by. This is the most in-depth we can get with our data right now is through these extra GPS plots. So I was just confirming what we're seeing. And it's really the same story as the last 3 weeks on Kilauea, which we can observe visually just through the webcams. So here is the S2 camera for the last 24 hours. Still fume and steaming from that hot lava flow and those fissures in that area. But otherwise, it's pretty quiet out there. That's the S2 camera. And at the summit of Kilauea, a little clearer, but also some passing moisture. There's a water drop in the lens right there. But you can see that summit crater. Not looking a whole lot different than we've seen it. So those are our visuals on Kilauea. And now we'll go to Mauna Loa just for what's happening right now. And we did mention we're going to talk more about Mauna Loa, its eruption from 2022 after our break. But what's happening right now? Well, we mentioned this in our summary last week, but it might be worth showing it again, that the USGS went up to Mauna Loa summit to repair wind damage at the radio telemetry site. Now, radio telemetry, this is sending back all their data, all their GPS, everything, right? So this is likely why we're having data offline at the USGS webpage. Not only we're getting Mauna Loa data offline, but because on Kilauea, you can't always shoot a straight signal from, let's say, behind a little hill or a little rise straight to Kilauea summit. Quite often, USGS would set up their signals to bounce off Mauna Loa and then back down. And so that telemetry site being out affects the entire network and not just Mauna Loa, is the point. So here are some of those images. They talk about how they found solar panels ripped from their masts. You can see there's the mast and all the panels face down on the lava. That's not good. Some of these you can see some smashed glass right there in the solar panel. Some holes right in the middle of that thing. Not good either. Nice views of Mauna Kea in the background. See there some of the damage after they've picked things back up. So they managed to do a partial fix and get the web cameras online. However, that's as far as we've got. We do appreciate the webcams. Here is a summit webcam coming in live today from the summit in visual and in thermal. In case something were to happen again, we do have that up there now. But the signals are all pretty quiet. Here's a tilt at the summit, very low values, very little wiggles, nothing really to speak of here. Earthquakes have been low, overall fairly shallow, one deeper one there, but at very low counts. The tilt over the last month at the summit is showing some variations, but these might be cyclical or perhaps flank related. It's not quite clear exactly here. But they're happening on their own without any clusters of earthquakes that accompany them, which tells us that's most likely not the magma, but something else adjusting on a volcano there. So here's the last month, pretty similar. Earthquake rates per day peaked at 5 this past week. You see it's very quiet up there. For the last year per week, here we are at 15, which is about average for the whole last year. And for the last 5 years, as we started off in our summary, we're very, very low. Much more clearly to see that we're in a recovery phase here following that eruption. So that's Mauna Loa. There's the earthquake plots for the last week, month, and year. I'll just show this quickly. And as well, our GPS on Mauna Loa is out. But again, we can come to that other seismic network and show you guys MOKP at the summit. And it is showing a little bit of scatter here, but overall you can see it's a rising trend, maybe slowing from what it was doing before. It's kind of turning over a little bit, right? An up component. And as before, the MLSP, which is the one USGS shows on their website, is also still rising up. Now these plots, unlike the other ones I showed you guys, this is going back to 2000 or so, right? So this is a 25-year plot compared to the last one I was showing you guys what might have been a 6-month or 9-month plot or so. So it's much more compressed. It looks steeper here, but it's following that same regular pattern of uplift as we've seen ever since the eruption ended. So all good on Mauna Loa. And that's the first half of our update for you guys here. And we'll pass it off to Lou next with our community corner before we can come back in and do our second half. Sound good, Dane?
Yeah, sounds like a plan. I think I might be lagging, but I will get Lou on here and talk at least. All right. Thanks, Phil. Hey, Lou.
Hey, you are your little jumpy laggy there.
All right. Well, why don't you take this then?
Yeah, I'll jump right into the community corner. Let's see what's going on. I do have information on the park today. Let's see here. There we go. So alerts and conditions and what's going on up at the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. The Kilauea Visitor Center closure update will close for renovation January 5th, 2025. Where can you find a park ranger? Well, they're up there. Limited visitor services at the Hawaii Pacific Parks Association store will relocate 1.2 miles west to a welcome center at Kilauea Military Camp's KOA room adjacent to the lobby. Now, while this is going on, After Dark in the Park, Naleo Manu, and other park programs held at the KFC auditorium are temporarily suspended. But there is still stuff going on up there. So make that note. KFC closes 5 p.m. on January 5th. That's the visitor center, restrooms, and parking area. I did take a look at the roads. This is the road conditions up there. Only Mauna Loa Road closed between 8:30 a.m. and 4 p.m. There is your road updates. Remember that the Nene are nesting. Crater Rim Trail is closed 650 feet east of Waikahuna parking area due to the nesting Nene. I did find this nice picture of newly asphalted. I'm pretty sure that's newly asphalted and not just rain. It looks nice up there, up at Waikahuna. There is our Mauna Load closure. Started November 4th for 6 weeks. The road will reopen on weekends and holidays to all users, including November 27th through Thanksgiving weekend until work resumes the following Monday. Now, the Mauna Loa Trail to Red Hill Cabin will remain open, but access to and from the trailhead during work days will only be permitted before 8:30 or after 4 p.m. And if you are hiking to Red Hill Cabin, please know you have to get a backcountry permit. See the office in the park. How is the boardwalk doing? Well, they say it's going great. Almost done with the task of replacing the old weather-worn wood on the 600-foot-plus boardwalk. Sturdy weather-resistant yellow cedar planks and new reinforced foundation will hold up for years to come. When I read this, I was curious what they were going to use on for the boardwalk, because they have a lot of weather, the sulfur up there. So good on them for stepping it up with the yellow cedar. What's left to do? Put in the new benches, sand out the rough spots, and clean up. The park hopes to reopen Sulphur Banks Trail and the lovely new boardwalk in the next couple weeks. And there's some more pictures of the boardwalk there. Thank you to NPS for keeping us updated on those.
One thing I'm hoping with that new walkway is it impacts the hornet situation or the wasps or whatever they are out there.
For the better?
Yeah, for the better. Because that walk was always just getting buzz type of thing in recent years at least.
Maybe they're less attracted to the yellow cedar?
Or maybe all their nests got destroyed in the process. I don't know.
Yeah, possibly. It looks like a nice boardwalk, though. All right. So we have not had much going on with the After Dark in the park presentations because of everything with the construction going on. But they have the Big Island Singers in concert tomorrow night. 7 p.m. Big Island Singers presents their Earth, Sea, Sky concert in its 5th season of celebrating the world around us through song. The Big Island Singers is a 36-person community chorus led by Doug Albertson, part of Hawaii Volcano's ongoing After Dark in the Park programs and co-sponsored by the Friends of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. It's free, but park entrance fees apply. So that's tomorrow night, a rare Friday night show going on in the Kilauea Visitor Center Auditorium. And if you are looking for something else to do at the park, they have Life on the Edge. It's totally free. It's an engaging and lively 30 to 45-minute introduction to the summit on a short guided walk from the table at Waikahuna, 10 o'clock, 11, 1, and 2 p.m. You can meet a friendly ranger at Waikahuna parking area conveniently located by the restrooms. Dive into the captivating eruptive history of Kilauea Volcano, where the earth itself comes alive with stories. So that goes on every day from December 1st to December 31st with not a lot of programs going on for After Dark in the park. I thought that would be kind of nice to throw up there. And Dane, I know you're headed downtown tomorrow. This is where you're going. The Hilo Christmas Extravaganza. One of our viewers sent this to me and she asked me if I would put this up. And I was like, you know what? Dane would love this. So I will definitely get this up. 100+ crafters and artists will be there. Support local. There you go.
You're not vending there.
Oh, I bet there'll be a food truck out front. Guaranteed. If you have an event that you would like to have us post up on Community Corner, reach out to us at contact@hveri.org and we'll see what we can do. And we are still going on with our end of the year fundraiser. We have a little time left. When I put this together today, it was at $13.68, but we have jumped up to $18.68. So
Math
thank you very much.
Know.
What's that?
Math is hard.
Math is hard. Yeah. So thank you, everybody that have donated to us. We appreciate it. We are a 501c3 community-based organization, and we rely on all of you.
Yeah, appreciate it. And we also rely on the Puna Strong and Kilauea Recovery grants through the Hawaii County and is administered through Hawaii Community Foundation. So we really appreciate them and their continued support for the crazy stuff that we come up with and try and be like, hey, this is a great idea, guys. You should finance it. And they're like, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And that's why we have so many different programs and get to do some of the cool stuff that the support. And we really rely mostly on the community, right, to get this information out there. The likes, subscriptions, the shares, all that stuff really does help with the algorithm to get it out there in front of more eyes. So we appreciate that. I know that this week's not the best with Iceland going off. The views there pretty spectacular, but we appreciate the regulars for turning out every week. Yeah, we got a little bit special coming up in the second half.
Yep. Best way to donate to us is at hveri.org/donate. Thank you again to everybody who's participated in all of our fundraisers and helps keep us going. Aloha.
All right. Well, thank you, Lou. And with that, I think we can move on and we will see you a little later, maybe. Or I think maybe I don't know what the plan is. We'll see. All right. Thanks, Lou.
Yep.
Do a little shuffle and we're back.
All right. Yeah. Nice there.
So don't got a lot in the way of questions. There was one, if we want to do that now.
Sure.
So I'm not sure on this one. I was going to just throw it by you to see if you recognized it, but what the devil has been going on with the R931 seismometer? Do you recognize that label?
I would have to look it up. So I really have no idea.
I was trying to look it up and I was landing in California and Alaska. So I don't know type of thing on that one, but I figured I'd throw it out there.
Yeah, without looking at it, it's hard to really say, right? What we can say is what's been happening in our island in the last week. It's been pretty crazy weather. It seems like it's been raining a lot, and I don't know what's going on with that station, right? But some factors of things that go wrong around these times of year might be losing data because the things go offline, as we saw that happen earlier in the week. Sometimes you have data gaps. Sometimes you have extra, like maybe water can get into the equipment and start giving you some funny signals, and things just go flatline or offline. So without really seeing it, I'm not really sure, but it does happen quite a lot that stations need to be maintained. There's quite a lot of stations of all kinds across the island, and as we saw, they just got to repairing the webcams, and they still have to catch up on all the rest of the telemetry. So don't know what's going on with that particular station, but I didn't know that the whole network is not quite repaired yet, and they're still working at it. That I can say.
Do have one comment here from Facebook. Chris says that it's certainly not a big deal, but 3 earthquakes on the north flank of Mauna Kea within a few hours of each other today is certainly not something we see very often.
Yeah, good observation there. Yeah. And even when you have what we call the background pattern of earthquakes, you can still have clusterings, or sometimes aftershocks, or I forget the term now, but when you have one earthquake and then change the regional forces and then cause another earthquake to happen, not as an aftershock in that same area, but a little distance away, like some kind of domino effect kind of thing. So you can have those kind of things happening as well. Yeah, interesting to note that little cluster happening for sure. Yeah, appreciate that, Chris.
Yeah. All right, I think that gets us through the Q&A.
All right, so we'll do our volcano awareness presentation next. And this week, we'll focus on that first part of Mauna Loa. I know we came to you guys a couple weeks ago with a presentation from Volcano Awareness Month by Frank Truesdell and Ingrid Johansson that summarized a lot of the science that comes into that. So we'll talk very briefly on that, but mostly we'll leave that as it is, and we'll pick up with the community outreach that was happening by the USGS and Civil Defense ahead of the eruption and what they were telling the community there. So let me put that on our screen here and just show you guys that there were 3 different meetings scheduled: October 22nd, October 27th, and November 5th. And this was at Ocean View in Pahala and Konawaena Elementary, right? South Kona, Pahala, and Ocean View. The areas in South Hawaii where if an eruption were to occur from Mauna Loa, you would have the least time to evacuate and respond. So that's why right here is where they focus this outreach effort. During that outreach effort, what we saw was them present all this data all the way back to 1975, where they showed us both earthquake counts before 75 and 84 had been high, as well as the distance change, what we now measure with GPS across the crater, was also moving quite rapidly. So 75, 84, we're building up here since 2015. And at that point in time, they were saying, we don't know, it's possible. It might come, it might not, but it's different than it's looked for a long time. So they had as well GPS data. Here's our GPS data showing the directions of swelling. This is from April to October 2022. So magma is filling this whole area and pushing out from the summit in every direction. But partly this was influenced by the fact that Mauna Loa was not the only volcano active at the time. Kilauea was also very active during that same time and also had massive GPS movements. So you can see that the interaction between the two is something that is going to matter, but we'll touch on that probably more so in the weeks to come. But here's the picture before that eruption happened with GPS, everything moving on Mauna Loa and Kilauea both. But sticking with Mauna Loa, here we have that satellite view showing there really was this butterfly pattern of deformation, which we've learned means there was a dike, a planar sheet of magma that's standing on end beneath the summit to cause this effect. And it was fairly widespread across much of this upper reach of the volcano here. So they noted as well, seismicity at the summit occurs in 2 clusters. We have a slightly deeper cluster that occurs to the northwest. It looks like in this plot. I'm not sure what's happening with the colors in this plot here, but yeah, slightly deeper in the northwest than under the summit, and then two distinct clouds here, right? So you actually have that northwest cloud and that beneath the summit cloud itself here. And similarly, before 75 and 84, they saw both of those as well. Right now, there's always this issue of how do you compare data from before to data now, which is why you see this filter of magnitude greater than 1.7. That's the best we can do nowadays to try to match the data to be equivalent from then to now. So similar patterns. And in October of 2022, you can see that they're pointing this out. Hey, look at this. It would be a month later that the volcano would erupt, of course. So I thought we could look at this a little bit more closely with the Iris Earthquake Browser. I've loaded in here from October 1st, 2018, which is right after the eruption ends at Kilauea, and Mauna Loa picks up the baton, and ending that on December 1st after the eruption begins in 2022. So our histogram is showing similar to what we just saw in that other plot, but I'm just going to animate it for you guys to see here what that actually looked like. And because I'm going 4 years here, you don't really see some of the gaps in between. It gets smoothed a bit, but here it goes in any case. You can see clusters in the northwest, clusters at the summit, clusters in the northwest. And though it's sped up here, it did seem like in its early years, it was alternating more so cluster over here, then more so cluster over here. Not 1,000%, right? But, mostly. And here's that pattern leading up to the eruption where it finally burst through. So that's the little bit of that cluster. And what I wanted to point out is there have been some recent papers, including this one that is about triggering the 2022 eruption of Mauna Loa by Kendralyn and other colleagues. And in this supplemental section, they do note, in fact, this alternation. They've drawn a line here. This is a dividing line across this earthquake region. And they can actually calculate statistics on one side versus the other side. And that's what they're basically doing. And they say that up until 4th of August, 2022, they were seeing that alternating effect and actually lower counts. And from September 20th on, they were seeing them both active synchronously, as they call it. Synchronous activity versus alternating activity, right? And so to them, this was one of the new signals that we should pay attention to, is not just are the earthquakes happening, but are the northwest quadrant and the beneath caldera quadrant happening at the same time. We've now learned this is something that actually matters, right? From hindsight. And this was not hidden. None of these conclusions are hidden at the time that we were going through this. But with the context of hindsight, we can go back and pull these things out as something to pay special attention to in the future. These patterns of earthquakes, northwest and beneath the summit. So those earthquakes were all over the place. It wasn't just beneath the summit. We produced this graphic back in the day. Here, let's get that we'll go off the top there so you can see it. And so what I've done here, in case you've never seen this before, is I've taken from September 17th to October 15th, and I plotted the earthquakes with the USGS tool in this region over here, right, with one end of it being northwest of Mauna Loa summit, and going southeast all the way across the Deep Pahala cluster, right, which had a bunch of earthquakes all overlapping each other, which were really confusing to understand. Because when you pull those in cross-section, you see that those Deep Pahala hotspot earthquakes were directly overlaid by a bunch of flank earthquakes at shallower depth right there, right? So today we still have Pahala earthquakes still activating, but they're not pushing all the pressure up into the volcano, causing the summit to fill and push the flank sideways to cause flank earthquakes. This is how pressurized we were in October of 2022. Like we had earthquakes happening at the hotspot and beneath the summit, and on a flank as the summit was expanding, pushing it laterally. Right, so here's that original plot, and then we put it onto this cross-section so you can see a little better what this actually means in structural space. Right, so the raw, and then with the context of the mountains. And if we zoom into the summit right in here, that's what this box actually is, right over here. So what you see is that there is a deeper, more narrow pathway that broadens when you get above sea level, right in there. So this is something we saw as well that began back in September of 2022. So this is that shallowest cluster of earthquakes that we see, and this gets referred to by the USGS as well when they talk about their other models and so forth. So we'll point that out here. We'll come back to it again. And finally, for the earthquakes, just worth pointing out that in all those earthquakes, some of those were actually quite big. There was even a large Pahala earthquake, deep Pahala earthquake that occurred, like a 5.1 in that buildup. It actually damaged the Pahala library, had to be close repairs, and there were other effects as well. But I'll just highlight the one that was the community was really feeling all these earthquakes for many, many months ahead of time. All right, so what else did they talk about? And I know I'm just still setting the stage here, but they pulled out at the time this image showing what were the previous 4 months of buildup to what was happening on Mauna Loa. And they pointed out the GPS inflation, which had been rising and had a couple of these little wiggles up and down, which were always interesting. And nothing was really that obviously different in this interval here until that October 14th earthquake, when we really saw a slowdown actually at the summit up there. But they point out 3 time periods that are important. September 17th, the beginning of strong unrest. October 1st, shallow inflation ends. And then that other earthquake following October 14th, that deep Pahala earthquake there. And the middle is the tilt at the MOK station. And this is what they're pulling out as perhaps the most significant thing they saw. Right? The scale here is, this is down at -1. Up here, this looks like it's at 3 microradians. We're looking at a 4 microradian increase step up that occurred during those 2 weeks at the summit. And this is something that ever since this instrument had been installed, had never been seen at this station ever before, which might be to say that since the instrument was installed, magma had never come this shallow before under Mauna Loa summit. So this we knew then as well. And at the same time as that was happening, we saw this massive ramp up in earthquakes, right, that we showed you guys just now. So it's really in the end, the combination of the earthquakes and the tilt. And since then, it's been pointed out a couple other factors as well. What they call the seismic speed, right? How fast earthquakes are actually traveling through the mountain. Because when a volcano is really swollen and pressurized, all the little cracks that exist all get closed, and the earthquakes can move through there faster. It's all more compressed. So you get this boost in speed that occurred before the eruption of Mauna Loa, and was also detected before the eruption of Kilauea, even back in 2018. So that's something that we should see more of in the future, I would expect. All right, and then the other thing was this alternation of earthquakes, northwest and center. So those are the things we can look out for in the future. But it does lead me to wonder, if we go back in time to this slide the USGS put forth during those presentations, what would they say differently today? Because here was the status at the time. They were saying they saw inflation at the summit, upper southwest rift. They saw above background seismicity at the summit, upper southwest rift, and on the flanks. But what they thought they were missing, consistent and or persistent seismicity. I wonder if now we would caveat that to say, okay, what we're really looking for is seismicity synchronously northwest and the summit together. That might be one way to interpret more consistent and more persistent seismicity. Now we know that's what to look for, and not just it going all nuts everywhere all at once, right? Maybe it's more subtle than that, perhaps. And then we're also looking for increasing rates of deformation and seismicity. And I wonder if now we would go back and see really this tilt signal and this ramp up in earthquakes as that increasing rate signal. I think now if we saw the tilt meter move again, that would possibly check this box right here already. So perhaps in October of 2022, if we knew everything we knew now, we might actually be saying, we're ready. It's just a matter of time now. The volcano is filled to the shallowest regions. It can't do it for very long. It's going to erupt. And so we would hope next time we might have a little bit more head time. We'll have to wait and see if it works out the same way. But this is the first data set we have with our current network and the data that it collected with the modern day eruption. Dan, you want to jump in with something?
The other thing we had was that magnitude 5.1 that was, I thought initially Pahala, but then the depth, and the USGS came out and said, no, it's Mauna Loa. And we had talked about that Mauna Loa likes to throw out those types of earthquakes before going into activity. And at the time, we were like, maybe not. It doesn't seem like it's the one. It's too small. But in retrospect, it's like, yeah, that was the one. Like that was
I don't
the
know.
quake. I don't know.
I still don't think it's the one, because we broke the
So-
pattern. Is why we broke the pattern,
Right.
because we thought about we had to have a summit eruption and a rift eruption, and we didn't have one of those. Actually, we broke the pattern. So everything we thought about before we just didn't know enough ultimately, right? And yeah, we could say that earthquake maybe, but it didn't. It doesn't really fit. And maybe we're trying to force it into the boxes that we had, and maybe we should start over, honestly, right? Because of everything we've come into, and maybe and that's maybe a good segue to what comes next, because that image that we just showed you guys from the meeting is what's shown here on the top of this most recent paper, Triggering Eruption of Mauna Loa in 2022. Right, there's our tilt signal right there. They've actually now plotted velocity decrease. So this black line is velocity, and there at the same time as tilt is going up, velocity is crashing down. So there you go. That's now a giveaway. Right, here's a GPS pairs, and I don't see a whole lot really jumping out right there. Maybe a little bit of an extra increase, but nothing that jumps out, as we said. The seismicity is there, as they point out as well. So tilt, GPS, seismicity. What have they added? They've added these crystal clocks, as they like to call them. Right, this is what they're calling diffusion chronometry, where they went and took a whole garbage can full of tephra from the eruption, crushed it onto little pieces, picked out the olivines, which were not very many, but they found them. And then they did this analysis on all the olivines. So every one of these dots is an olivine or a crystal. It could be an instantite. There's 3 of those, but mostly they're olivines. And they then have timed these with days prior to the eruption. So this new technique is really, really groundbreaking. This is only the 5th study using this technique on any volcano in the world ever. Right, so we're in at the early end, how many volcanoes we have. And they can basically tell you within days how long magma was stored at each area, at each different depth of the volcano. So here's how it actually looks. And so what they can say is that within this darker gray period right here, that's 90% of the whole population of olivines falls into this event. So not only are you seeing tilt and velocity decrease and seismicity, after the fact, we see the crystals rose into that period of shallow magma at the exact same time. And that's what this is really telling you, which is really amazing. There's all kinds of other crystal science we could get into at some point. I'll just maybe touch very, very slightly on it here. Here's what they're looking at. This is an image of the relative abundance here of magnesium. This is a magnesium X-ray element map, as it's called. And so the abundance is high where it's red, it's a little bit lower where it's yellow, etc. Right? So what you can see is it's high in the middle, and it's leaked out, it's lower at the edges because it's diffused away out of the crystal. Right? So this is what they're using to do the timing of days. And there's some other cool things. Normally, a crystal doesn't grow rounded, so this crystal has actually been remelted in the magma before growing this extra rim around it on the outside, glass as well. So a lot of cool stuff happening here. Here's a phosphorus scan, phosphorus X-ray map, this middle one here, and showing some of the different internal growth crystals that have been perhaps dissolved and regrown several times before this most recent event. And this one up here is just highlighting all the different fluid and other inclusions and other particular minerals that are useful for them to look at. So this is this new groundbreaking technique. When I was a young student, we would look past all these little bubbles in our thin sections to look at the actual real rock. And now those little bubbles are super important for these kind of timing studies. So really fascinating to see how this has evolved. And the long and short of it is this image right here, right, where they actually can say, okay, of all of our fluid inclusions, that's what FIs stand for, so they can actually calculate a pressure of where they had to form, and pressure usually relates to depth in the earth, right? So where are the depths where our fluids were actually hosted, right? And so they come up with this population here at 3 kilometers depth. There's actually a smaller one here between 1 and 2 kilometers depth. This is new. No one's ever noted this before, ever. This band right in here. And there's also this much deeper storage way further down as well. Right? So, and this long pathway can give you this whole population down here. Without going into any more details, more or less, that leads you to a model that looks something like this. And this is very, very rough, of course. But what you're looking at is there is a shallowest storage area all the way up here that's hosting these crystals for between 1 day and 2 months. 2 months the longest. Those that came in September, but the magma is still coming in all the way to the eruption day. So those last 2 months are picking up signals from this uppermost chamber. Above sea level, right? If you're on Kilauea and you're looking at Mauna Loa, you're looking at the area that's filling with magma right there. Below that, down at 4 to 5K down, just below sea level, that's your typical shallow storage that we've been seeing moving over the last couple of decades. So magma filling, magma moving, but no tilt meter. Tilt meter only responds to the upper one up here, right? Nothing else. The GPS will detect this movement from the lower one, but that's where all the action has been for the last 40 years, has been down in here until just recently. And they're also saying there's something much deeper down, and there it is down there as well. Right? So that's more evolved. And this is why I say maybe we just start over, because we've never been working with the idea that we even have a shallowest chamber on Mauna Loa ever before. And they can say that the characteristics of how things erupt and how the crystals move, that chamber maybe doesn't actually connect directly to the rift zones, but it maybe the rift zones connect through here, something like that, you know, right? So that you have to come back through, but there's this really weird dynamic in here with this being that extra overflow pressure for that eruption. So one last thing before we on this section, that's when I replay. Can I
you hop
this
on.
last?
Oh,
can I finish my thought?
Jump in there? Huh?
Can I finish my thought?
Oh, go for it.
And this last bit. So this is the last slide of this section. So, so here I need to come and pull this video on the screen here. This is Ingrid Johansson. Just a minute of her talking and showing how the magma was filling this area underground through her model from the Volcanic awareness talk. So I'll show this and then jump in.
In that green pause, and it's about to start coming back up again. And at first it started, so here we are under Mokūʻaweoweo. After 2018, it started up first with this sort of mid-crustal reinflation. Oh, the black dots are earthquakes, in case that wasn't clear. So earthquakes that are happening simultaneously. And then we started to see this really deep opening. And this deep opening would persist, and in fact would start to march up and up and up and up. And remember, the colors are opening rate. So even if it stays red, it means it's just continuing to open more and more. And as this started to push up, we started to see fingers going up. These two fingers correlated with very clear increases in seismicity. So where this was very steady, these seemed very clearly associated with increases in shallow earthquakes. And in particular, this one happened together with an increase in seismicity in September of 2022. And it was that increase in seismicity, which did not go down, it persisted until the eruption, as well as seeing this very clear evidence for everything getting shallower, that really put our antennas out that, you know, it's really getting closer.
So just to tie it together here, like here is from our cross section, that shallowest chamber, that little blade that came up above sea level. That's all this thing right here. So hopefully this pulls it all together to wrap it up. I just wanted to kind of make sure we tied the bow on that for this section. So yeah, Dan, what do you got to say?
That's all right. We went way past it at this point. We went way past it.
Yeah, apologies. I want to make sure we tie things together here. All right, so that's that phase of the buildup and what we know from what actually led up to the eruption. And so what I'll do now is we'll switch over to the beginning of the eruption itself. And this was the evening of November 27th. Dane was watching the earthquakes and saw a bunch of earthquakes come in between 10 and 11 p.m. right there, and here's a seismic trace for what that actually looked like. So after the alert was put out, and way after the fact, we now have these videos of how the eruption actually began. This is the webcam from the summit in visual range, showing some red glow here, a little bit before the eruption actually begins. So some heat signal. There is that fissure coming across. By daybreak, no more red lava, just see steaming, and then it's just glowing at evening. It's looped again, but let's let it come across the day to the last night again. You'll see the glowing remnants of the flow. Just 24 hours later, it looked much different. We also have that in thermal. So there it is, a slower onset. You see it coming from that. You see that the vent originally opened up across the entire caldera floor, and then it seems like it dies off and migrates back to the west, and then the flow really stagnates, as we know now that the magma was going back into the volcano to feed a rift eruption from the northeast rift. So that's the slow version. We have a fuller version of that whole thing as well that goes all the way to the lava cooling a little faster. So here's that full day, the whole pad cooling. And we saw from the air the heat signal around Mauna Loa summit. It was so large we couldn't really see any detail or structure within it. We just knew that there was something massive happening up there. But after the fact, we have pictures of the before and the after of that caldera. So you can see this lighter gray is how far the lava filled the caldera. You can see all the way to the edge down here. One of these areas like that. If I pull it back, you'll note that the previous flow from 84 was not quite as same extent. Right? A little bit different before and after. That southern section is easy to see. A lot of the features in the middle got buried. Some of them stick up as high spots, like the cones in here. But also you might notice there's this fissure segment outside of the main caldera, but still within the summit region. This is going towards the southwest. And we do see here the evidence of new flows that came out from that region in this after picture as well. So the summit phase was really quite short, only a few hours before things moved to the northeast rift. But before that, there was a lot of commotion because the lava quite often will emerge from this upper southwest part of the caldera before doing any rift migration, and flows come from flows look like they're going down to Kona if you're down in Kilauea town. So anything you want to add about the summit here, Dane, before I talk about that southwest?
Yeah, it was just interesting how it's kind of a sneaky eruption. One of the ones that, you know, USGS, they did all these presentations, but really what they're saying is the window's open for the possibility for it to erupt. That night, weren't in time to be able to get like a escalation of the alert level out in time for the eruption. So it was already lava on the surface before anything happened, but it was still like, it was just interesting how we're sitting there watching the cams. We see the earthquakes. We're like, all right, so what's going on? Is it going to do something? And then one of the web cameras can't see anything on it, but all of a sudden it looks like it's daytime out there and it's orange. And it's like, okay, that camera doesn't ever do that. So we got a problem. I can't see anything at this point. The thermal hasn't updated. Nothing's updated. But it's like something's showing orange. And that's when we started to pull the triggers on getting stuff out and getting everybody woken up, essentially, to come back in. And it was the same at civil defense. I mean, we heard the mayor was at black and white night or something like that. And then gets the call that, hey, you're not done tonight.
Yeah, and the first concern, I guess, was people from Kona wondering if there was going to really be a migration. That's what we were really wondering about. Is the magma going to stay at the summit? Is it going to go down the southwest rift? Is it going to go down the northeast rift? And of all those options, the southwest rift is the scariest that we've been talking about. We've been prepping people in the southwest rift for that potential. And then they saw lava at the summit, moving southwest, and that became a whole other aspect of this story here. So, have a little bit of a clip from the Volcano Awareness Month of Frank talking about this briefly. So maybe I'll play that to get us going, and we can jump into it after that. So let's see here.
So this is a thermal camera and the summit, and it's looking out there, and the temperature bars are here. We're looking across Mokūʻaweoweo. This is to the southwest, and this is to the northeast to the left. And the fissure then cut from that southwestern part. Right here, you can see an increase in temperature that actually preceded the geophysical signatures by 2 minutes before the onset of the eruption. And the lava then migrated across the caldera there. And as the dikes opened up, we started to see that social media started to blow up because people in Kona started to send pictures. This is down here at Kailua Kona, and they're looking up and they see these fingers of lava coming, and everybody was all pretty much totally thinking that lava was descending upon where they live. And the case is that there have been other eruptions in these time periods shown here in the bottom that lava has been visible in this area. This is an area that's part of the South Caldera. The lava is cut across a high plateau. They are visible. There have been no eruptions in the historical period where lavas in this area have ever threatened where people live. So this is normal, even though people were quite, let's say, worried.
Yeah, and after the fact, there was a flyover that released this image. And so we now have this image looking, here's a summit caldera, and here is this in the summit to the southwest part with a fissure that had erupted, still fuming profusely, and some flows that had erupted, and these were the flows that were seen from Kilauea town that appear to be heading off in that direction.
I remember that night when we were sitting there, we were doing the 5-hour live stream or however long it was, and saying how many times it doesn't matter until it gets out of the summit, right? The summit is the key. Once it leaves the summit, people are like, it's left the summit. It's like, no, that doesn't count. And it started this weird, like, what is the summit type of thing? What counts? But we'll get into that more. But I just remember that part where it's like, oh, it's moved into the northwest. Like, no, that's too close.
Yeah, and this has really been the I think to me like the major takeaway, right? That you just can't call it the summit. We need to have some other name for it because that's just too confusing to people, right? Because people think the summit, they think the caldera, and the geologists think above, what is it, 12,000 feet, 11,000?
Yeah, it depends. Some geologists will take that out. We'll get into it a little bit more. We'll dive into it a little bit more if we get into there. Yeah, but basically it's the three is the Mokūʻaweoweo caldera, and then the older caldera that's bigger and surrounds the area. And then there's the 12,000 foot elevation mark, which is also used by Jack Lockwood and some of the older school guys, I guess. Is what it is. So, interesting.
That's the, So this is what was one of the only images we had, but we did have one before this that snuck out that gave us a clue that was happening. And this was this Coast Guard infrared image that they released. And so here we are looking again. Here's the summit caldera with lava flow within it still right there. That's what most of this is right there. And so here's that crack to the southwest and that flow that issues from it. So we could see early on that there was a lot of hot stuff on the ground here. This is clearly all lava that had erupted outside of the inner caldera, but still within the summit. Right, so that's really all the imagery we have of this particular aspect of it. So Dane, you want to jump in with some of what the mayor and the USGS were saying, perhaps?
Yeah, well, we got some. We did interviews throughout this event, and that included the morning that everything erupted. So this eruption started at 11:30 at night, around that time period. Early in the morning, around 5 a.m. we get online, or 4 a.m., something along those lines. We get in a live stream with Mayor Mitch Roth and USGS scientist in charge of Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, Ken Hahn, and talk about what's going on and trying to figure out, if a decision's been made and what way have they been made. So we have some clips set up just for that early start of the eruption, that first, say, 24 hours around the eruption, that we'd like to just play for you. They're short clips, and then we'll talk about them a little bit.
We communicate as best as possible, and we certainly really appreciate the work you guys are doing that. This eruption started very abruptly, which a lot of Mauna Loa eruptions do, which is the message we were trying to pass out, is that basically before we could get the orange statement out, it had moved on into the eruptive mode. So it started with a magnitude 4+ earthquake at the summit, and then that just started an entire sequence of earthquakes. So there's clearly a dike that propagated to the surface. And we know from the end of September, that mid to end of September, a dike did propagate about halfway to the surface above the main magma chamber during that event. So it was primed and ready to go. And the internal stresses finally overcame the volcano and it erupted. What we don't know now is if it's going to remain in the summit or move down one of the rift zones.
All right. So yeah, that was just the beginning, and we were in those early hours before it transitioned, and we're just it's amazing though, because just stating the obvious, it feels like, right? But it's not so obvious to everybody.
Yeah, and it matters who says it, right? So when it comes to that time, we have to hear them say it for sure.
Yeah.
Even if we say the same thing and parrot them, they have to say it first, or say it as well.
Yeah. And now we have Mayor Mitch Roth.
Have opened up 2 shelters, one in Ka'u at the Ka'u Gymnasium, the other one at Old A's at the park over there. We have not issued evacuation orders at this time. Ken will tell you a little bit more about why that is. Basically, it's not threatening anybody at these times, but if we know that there are people in Ocean View who live up high that may be concerned, and being a little bit more conservative, it's not a bad idea to start thinking about that. We understand the roads have been very busy. We have not closed any roads down, but it sounds like the roads have become very busy. And
anything about just I appreciate that, because it was just the reality of the situation at the time. When we didn't know all that much, we had heard that gas stations were getting jammed up on Highway 11, but we didn't know the details of it and how bad the traffic jams were. We know that Frank Truesdale in the lead up to this was telling people, if you see the glow, it's time to go, right? So a lot of people saw the glow and they're like, all right, time to go. And they headed out, but the evacuation order, they created that little bit of, as the mayor was saying, playing it more conservative. But if you live in those upper slopes of Ocean View, might be a good idea. At least beat the traffic.
Yeah, I still feel we got lucky there. I still feel there wouldn't have been time to get people out of Ocean View from the top all the way out had the eruption moved to the southwest rift instead of the northeast rift. I think there was a very real chance people would have died. We would have had not quite a Lahaina, but something much more tragic than we saw in 2018. We were lucky. We saw the traffic jams with no preparation, no warning. What if people were all been trying to move out of there? It would have been ugly. So I still feel like that was a real, something we can learn from. That's good that happened then. And I would, lobby our leaders to evacuate as soon as the summit eruption happens, every time in the Southwest Rift, because better safe than sorry. And you don't have enough time, and someone's going to die.
And the road jams up. We see how even without an evacuation order, the road jams up. So you're going to need those hours. So say it was 6 hours from the summit eruption until the transition. You're going to need every minute of that to clear traffic out of that area. It's just not going to move. Not at how fast you want it to go. You might have to shut down traffic going in. That's going to be really rough, because then people are going to be like, my kids are back there. I have all my belongings back there. It gets really rough really quickly. But just letting it ride, as I've said before, 2022 Mauna Loa was training wheels run. we got a rift zone eruption. We got practice on it, but that was the most benign rift zone eruption I could have thought of. It took one little baby road and that's it. We got a viewing area up for it. Like, you do that on the Southwest Rift, no viewing area type of thing, gonna be rough really quickly. All right.
Situation like we've seen across the country, right, where you have to like wait for days afterwards to see like who really got killed by the thing, because it's all a mess. We don't want that ever. So we have work to do there for sure.
All right, next clip. About the schools tomorrow, is there any plans for those?
I don't have that information right now. I can ask Talmadge when I go in there. I know that there's a whole bunch of people working on a whole bunch of things. We've been reaching out to our county employees, hoping to hear from. Oh, there he is. Hey, Talmadge, anything on schools?
Just talked to, let's see, one of the CASs, and they're going to be open today.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Talmadge. I thought that one was just cool clip because it was like, this is so fresh and so new that not even the mayor knows if the schools are open tomorrow, but we figured it out on the stream together type of thing. Like, oh, there's some, Talmadge is right over there. Ken waves to him, comes over, and now we have our question answered and we can start putting out that information that schools are open. It was just interesting to me, like, to see that dynamic, because I feel like that's what it should be, is what it could be, essentially. The potential's there.
Yeah. So in the future, we'll have to close the schools also if we want people to evacuate, right? And there's going to be like, oh, let's try to go to school anyways. Even though eruption began 6 hours ago, uphill from here. Yeah, none of that. Please.
Historically have these eruptions. They start at the summit and they'll go into one rift zone or the other. They don't go into both rift zones. They don't jump between the rift zones. So it's not like it'll finish erupting on the northeast rift zone and then immediately go over to the southwest rift zone. The next eruption of Mauna Loa, I mean, who knows how long it will take between this one and the next one, but could very well be on the southwest rift zone again. And I know people, originally saw those lava flows that were coming out of the southern end of the caldera. And I have to, make a distinction here between Mokūʻaweoweo caldera and the summit of Mauna Loa. The summit feature is much bigger. There's an older outer caldera ring fault, and all the collapsed pit craters in there lie within this bigger caldera feature. So when we talk about the summit, we talk about that. And there was a fissure that extended out of the caldera, but still within the bigger structure. And that was what put out those lava flows that people could see.
Yeah. So talking about that, what is the caldera again? And the funny thing about that is like, this was still early. This was still within that early window. So we said, it didn't go out of that structure that we define the caldera as, or as the summit as. It did. By that definition, it did go outside of that, the fissure line. So that's where we start getting into the debate, because the idea of where he says it starts at the summit and then it moves into the rift zone and it doesn't move rift zone. I still think that's solid. It's just it's figuring out what is a move into the rift zone or not type of thing.
What counts? Yeah.
What counts? Yeah. What do we count? What do we not? So interesting. And it's really just the highlights from the first day. And it was 3 people on one Zoom call. It was pretty rough. We were having IT difficulties, internet issues, Zoom issues, compatibility, but we still were able to get it out there. And that was at the end of the day, the most important thing is being able to get that information out in a timely fashion.
Yeah, it was a big step forward, and we play the clip on our intro all the time, right? But there was no news media, no TV media operating at 4 o'clock in the morning, so they really relied on social media to get the word out, and we were a big part of that. So that was for us, as Dana said before, a great proof of concept of our model of what could actually be and how we could work together and collaborate, because we all want the same thing. We all want to have a better impact of any eruption, better community safety, preparedness, response, the whole thing. That's really our whole mission as a nonprofit.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's that summit phase, that Southwest Rift phase. That's most what we'll focus on today. I can transition us into that second phase that we'll talk about in 2 weeks' time from today. So I can do that by starting off by showing the first map the USGS put out by that next morning when they saw there had been a new fissure opening up on a northeast rift zone with flow fronts moving slightly to the northeast. They had just labeled fissures inactive in the morning, caldera floor mostly covered now inactive, early morning flows inactive in the southwest, and they hadn't quite got anything mapped out yet. And so that was that initial first phase of it moving to the rift zone. They noted the view from up rift to down rift as well. They Dewey cone, steaming cone, 3 fissure segments at this point. There will be a 4th that opens later on. And this is what it would actually produce, these long flows in this USGS image here that were started moving down the rift zone. Eventually producing by the end of, it's really day 2, because we begin on the 27th, just before midnight. So really the 28th is really our first full day, 29th, second. So here we are into the 3rd day on the 30th. That flow has come down quite a ways here. Where's our scale? That's 2 miles. We're looking at maybe 5 or 6 miles that's come down the road there. So we'll continue the story more in a couple of weeks here, but I thought I could show you guys a couple of time lapses of the beginning of that phase there. So let me pull this back here. So this is a combination of the MK and MK2 cameras. I pulled out just the night views here so you have a better idea of what the flows were actually looking like. And there they are, and we'll just go through the eruption here so you guys can remember what that second phase was like. We'll talk in more detail about this in the future, but here's how it all ties together from the before to that first sequence to this much longer last sequence that lasted most of the 2 weeks here, from November 28th until December, what was the date ended? The 13th? We can find out here shortly. So yeah, that's Mauna Loa, that first phase of it. And we could go on and talk longer, but I think we're at maybe a good stopping point here, and we'll wrap it up there for now.
I think so too.
All right, is there any questions we have to discuss? Or do we?
Yeah. There, not really. Mostly comments from people like Lance that were there that night and talking about the glow and how it was overcast that night. And we know 2018, whenever it's overcast and you got a live lava fountain, everything is red. The sky is red, the ground is red, every piece of light is red. And yeah, just flashing back to that first night and everything happening there.
I'll play this full clip while we talk here, is because it really, with the daytime, you really see how much the weather was a big part of it. And when we talk in a couple of weeks about how we had lava viewing, really the weather was a big part of it, right? Like when you went,
the overflights too. Like we didn't get up the entire eruption in the sky, and we saw so many flights scrubbed from people that were trying, pilots that had aircraft to be able to do it. Scrub, can't go, weather, can't go. So it was the little footage that we did get out of there, like that Coast Guard footage at night, those military flights, very important.
Yeah. So there's obviously a lot more to talk about Mauna Loa. We just thought we would take this as our second crack at it, after letting Volcano Awareness Month be our introduction to it with our most recent data. I think it's fascinating to think back about what we might have done differently or what we might do differently next time, now that we've learned what the real keys were, key indicators, right? We now have a new model with the volcano. We have new key indicators. So it could go differently next time. Maybe we'll from the very month before, start that effort more robustly, right? Not that it wasn't when we did it there, but we were kind of waffling a little bit. Is it going to do it? We're not sure. It's really different. We're not sure.
Well, and that plays
As
back
opposed
to
to-
the decades before that, where that was the talk every year or two, like type of
Right.
thing. Like, oh, Mauna Loa is ramping up. It's about to, and it doesn't do anything, right? There's a lot of people that thought like, it's all bluffs. It's all. I've heard this song and dance my whole life about it's about to do
Right.
something, right? So it's like that more precise discussion about it, being able to hone that window in a little bit more, I think is going to be really important.
Right. Now we can say that none of those other times did seismicity go from alternating to synchronous. None of those other times did the seismic velocity go up. Did the tote meter register a signal? All those things that we now know, okay, like that's what we're looking for. We just didn't know because
Right.
we've never seen it before. Now we've seen
Won't
it
get
once.
baked out
So that's
as much.
yeah, I mean, and we know from Kilauea it can do different things. So at least we have something to go on, right? It's something to go on.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I really don't see much in the way. Let me just double check Facebook. Nope, nothing Facebook. Yeah, I think we're good. Oh, I did have one. It came in kind of awkward here. So they used to say certain there was no correlation between Mauna Loa erupting while Kilauea would be quiet. I think this is about the inverse correlation between Mauna Loa and Kilauea question on those.
Yeah, I have a whole segment on this that I did not include today because it would take too long. So that is true, Victoria. I think it's pretty clear they are correlated, right? You know, in short, we saw that Mauna Loa essentially slowed down for Kilauea's 2018 eruption. And then when Kilauea's 2018 eruption was over, that's when Mauna Loa picked it up and began. And actually, even though Kilauea was erupting, when Mauna Loa was began erupting, Mauna Loa's eruption caused Kilauea to stop erupting because it was taking away, it was changing the pressure field.
And it was so
start
easy
again a
to
month
connect.
later.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just stopped. Just and it restarted once Mauna Loa stopped. It restarted. Kilauea restarted. Not for very long, but
it was still just the timing of
there.
it was just
Yeah.
so easy to connect, and especially with what we've seen prior to that.
So that's the modern record. There is a paper as well that does a whole bunch of modeling that we will bring up again. I know we covered it during the eruption 2022. Yeah, and then we've also heard in the Volcano Awareness Month, Frank Truesdale talk about his experience as a mapper and how really over geologic time, all the flows he's seen, the volcanoes are anti-correlated. In fact, yeah. So there's a lot goes on there, and we can probably walk that a long way back, Victoria, from what we used to say.
Right. One of my favorite things from Frank was I can't remember who it was at USGS. They got asked this question, and they gave the standard. Yes, they could be. The evidence suggests, and then Frank just follows it up as like, "Yeah, they're definitely correlated. I'm just gonna say it. Like I'm confident enough just to say it." I'm like, "Thank you." Like,
yeah, anti-correlated. Yeah.
Or anti-correlated. Yeah.
When one's going. Yeah. All right. So plenty more to talk about. As a reminder, we'll take next week off for Thanksgiving, and come back December 5th. Right, the eruption was still going on, so we'll come back and jump back into Mauna Loa then, unless Kilauea or some other activity pulls us out of our temporary reprieve here. So we'll see. If that does not happen, we'll be back with you guys in 2 weeks at a regular time on Thursday at 5 p.m., December 5th. Mahalo, you guys. Dane, anything else?
That's it for me. Have a good Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yeah, mahalo, everybody. Appreciate all of you. Mahalo to our ASL interpreters, Dino and Carrie, and to Lou on the back end and doing our community corner. So from the nonprofit HVERI, Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute, I'm Philip Ong and Dane DuPont. Aloha, everyone.